It's summer, the year 793. On a tiny island off the coast of England, the monks of Lindisfarne are singing their morning prayers. They have no walls, no soldiers. In 400 years, no one has dared to touch them. Then, someone sees the ships, long, low, silent, with a dragon carved on the prow. The men who come ashore are like nothing the monks have ever seen. They burn the church. They cut down the brothers at the altar. They load the gold and the survivors onto their ships, and they vanish back into the sea. Word races across Europe, and terrified people start adding a new line to their prayers. From the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord. That morning was only the beginning. For the next 300 years, these men from the frozen north would raid, trade, explore, and conquer their way across the entire medieval world, from the monasteries of Ireland to the rivers of the east, from the golden gates of Constantinople to the coast of North America, 500 years before Columbus. They were farmers who became legends, feared as monsters, and yet some of the greatest sailors who ever lived. This is the complete story of the Vikings in 10 minutes. Welcome to Sketchy History. So, who were they really? They came from Scandinavia, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, a hard land of fjords, forests, and long, dark winters at the very edge of the map. And here's the first surprise. Most of them were not warriors at all. They were farmers, fishermen, and traders living in low, wooden halls, scratching a living from thin soil. Viking was never a race of people. It was a job. To go Viking simply meant to sail away in search of silver and that iconic horned helmet, pure fiction, invented for an opera 1,000 years too late. A real Viking wore a plain iron cap, carried a spear or an axe, and hid behind a round wooden shield. Ordinary men who were about to terrify a continent. But why? Why would quiet farmers turn into raiders? Part of the answer was home. There was not enough good land and too many ambitious young men with nothing to inherit and everything to prove. And part of the answer was the neighbours. Just across the water sat Europe, rich, divided, and almost defenceless, its monasteries perched right on the coast, overflowing with gold and guarded by no one. To a poor northern farmer it must have looked insane. Why break your back through one more brutal winter when 3 days at sea could make you richer than a king? All they needed was a way to get there and back fast. And they had just built the perfect machine for it, the Longship. This was the real Viking superpower. It was a masterpiece of engineering built from overlapping planks that made it light, flexible, and unbelievably tough. It could ride mountains of water across the open Atlantic. And yet it drew so little that it could slip up a shallow river or run straight onto a beach. Wind in the sail when the weather was kind, oars in strong arms when it wasn't. That meant a crew could rise out of an empty horizon, hit a town before the bell could even be rung, and be gone before the soldiers arrived. You could not defend a coast against them because you never knew where the dragon would strike next. The ship was their sword, their home, and their road, all in one. After Lindisfarne, the floodgates opened. Every spring more ships came, and every year they struck deeper. They stripped the monasteries of Ireland bare and built a fortified harbour that would grow into the city of Dublin. They rode up the great rivers of the Frankish Empire, and in the year 845 a huge fleet reached Paris itself, and only left when the king paid them a fortune in silver to go away. They plundered the coast of Spain and pushed into the Mediterranean. What started as a few summer robberies had become a storm with no season. And somewhere along the way, the Northmen stopped wanting just gold. They started wanting the land. Then, in the year 865, the raiding stopped and the invasion began. This was not a war band chasing treasure. This was an army, the great heathen army, and it had come to take England for good. One by one, the ancient English kingdoms were crushed. The Vikings seized the whole north and east and settled it under their own laws, a territory that became known as the Danelaw. Only one kingdom refused to fall, Wessex, held by a young, desperate king named Alfred. He was beaten. He hid in the marshes with almost nothing left, and then he came back and won. He is the only king in all of English history remembered as the Great. The raiders had become rulers. The Northmen were no longer visiting Europe. They lived there now, and England was only one front. To the east, Swedish Vikings drove their boats down the great rivers of the east, trading furs, amber, and slaves, and they handed their name to a whole people and land. The Rus, who built Kiev, the heart of Kievan Rus. They reached the shining walls of Constantinople, the greatest city on earth, and the emperor was so impressed that he made them his personal bodyguard. Meanwhile, others turned the opposite way, out into the empty grey Atlantic, with no maps and no compass, reading the sun, the stars, the swells, and the birds. They found and settled Iceland. They pushed on to Greenland, led by a hot-tempered exile named Eric the Red. And around the year 1000, his son, Leif Erikson, stepped onto the shore of North America. For a few brief years, there were Vikings in a new world the rest of Europe wouldn't even dream of for another 5 centuries. But there was so much more to them than the axe. They worshipped a whole family of gods, one-eyed Odin who tore out his own eye in exchange for wisdom, red-bearded Thor with his hammer and his thunder, and dozens more. They believed a warrior who died bravely in battle would be carried to Valhalla to feast and fight until the end of the world. They carved their language into sharp lines called runes and spun long, gripping tales, the sagas, that people still read 1,000 years later. And they had law. Free men gathered in open-air assemblies called things to argue, judge, and decide together. Iceland's Great Assembly, the Althing, still meets today, one of the oldest parliaments on the planet. This was not just a band of killers. It was a civilization. Violent, yes, but also curious, poetic, and fiercely proud. No age lasts forever. Slowly, the Northmen became Christian. Their scattered chiefs became crowned kings, and those kings began to settle down. For a single astonishing moment, a Danish king named Nut the Great ruled England, Denmark, and Norway all at once, a Viking empire around the North Sea. But the tide was turning. In the year 1066, a Norwegian king named Harald Hardrada, the last of the great Viking warlords, invaded England and fell to an English arrow at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. And just 3 weeks later, England was conquered all over again, this time by the Normans, whose own great-grandfathers had been Vikings settled in France. The age of the Northmen was ended by the Northmen's own children. The dragon ships would never come again. And yet, they never truly disappeared. They are still here, in our maps, in our blood, and in the words we say every week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every one of them named for a Norse god. They founded cities, redrew nations, and stitched together a world that reached from the coast of America to the markets of Baghdad, in open wooden boats guided by nothing but the sky. For almost 300 years, From Lindisfarne to Stamford Bridge, the creak of their oars was the most terrifying sound in Europe. From the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord. If you want more history told like this, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments which story I should tell next.